Today, we're going to run through the elemental estimate and we're going to talk about the strategy. So over the past couple of weeks in previous videos that are uploaded, we talked about the overview, the elemental estimate, we talked about the structural items and entering into the system, and we talked about the finishing items. So today we're going to talk about strategy. Now we have made a small change to the system. On the right-hand side, there is generate estimation. So what we've actually done inside this system is basically we've turned off all the features to be able to enter the data into the system correctly. So what we're saying is step number one, populate your build details, location, enter your data into the price library, then hit generate estimate. So from there, when we generate the estimate, that's when everything gets calculated. But to enter the data into the system fast, do not generate the estimate prior to enter all the data. So enter the data into the system, generate estimate. So once the estimate is completed and you've entered the data into the price library, that's your generate estimate button on the right-hand side, creates the BOQ and it does all the calculations. So as we've already discussed, we enter in all the data. It will tell you all the brickwork. It will tell you all the concrete. It will give you a full overview of everything that goes into the project. You can adjust pricing, increase, decrease pricing, change spec levels and all that sort of stuff. So let's jump into it. We are going to propose a situation where possibly the client doesn't like the construction price. That is a very typical situation. I'm going to go and basically say we're sitting at $2.47 million right now. How do we revise the costing to be able to suit our favor? Well, we have the settings inside of build details to be able to change items. When we change the specification from low to medium and high, it will change the overall complexity and specification inside the estimate. The second step that we can do is we can change the type of builder. I do not recommend changing the type of builder. Obviously, what we can highlight to the client is, hey, we're sitting at $2.4 million. Mr. Client, that is the style of business that my company operates on. We engage with experienced laborers who charge us more than $90 an hour. There could be a situation where there's a builder down the road who engages with cheaper labor, may be able to complete the same project at the same quality. Hats off to them. If that is the case, we can, change it to a project builder and all our construction prices change. When it comes to strategy and overall of the system, there's not a lot we can actually do inside the price library when it comes to strategy. It is what it is. This is where all the data is basically entered into the system, and we can't make very many changes to improve the strategy of the estimation from here. Basically, all the work that happens with the strategy happens inside the BOQ. So inside the BOQ, the first step we want to do is we want to basically expand out all the headings, and then we want to make decisions about what goes into the project and what comes out of the project. For example, if we don't want to have site sheds, we can actually press the 0 button and then the pricing goes away for the site shed. If we go into the concrete, we can look at all the pricing of basically the whole system. If we don't like the pricing, we can change pricing on an individual level. We can change pricing on a sub-heading level and then a master heading level. So as I click out on each of these categories, I can actually change the subtotals of everything and it all goes up and it all goes down. There is a situation where if you have potentially made a mistake and you want to reset back to the original settings, you press the reset to original, which is the little blue spinny thing. Once you click that, it goes back to the original pricing. Same process happens inside of the BOQ. So if we are increasing the price of concrete, you'll actually notice that the reset button changes to blue and everything else is gray. If everything is gray, that means that it's the original price. Because it's gone to blue, we can reset it back. An interesting strategy that I want to start off with is I want to start into the fixtures and fittings. As I expand out into the plumbing fixtures, we have a $73,000 allowance for the plumbing fixtures. What I would like to do is potentially, sorry, I just increased it to 82 because I changed the specification, and this is exactly what I'm trying to talk about. So from here, we can actually change the ensuite to a low, outdoor fixtures to a low, and have the kitchen as high. We can technically go inside the estimation and press the plus button if we want to increase individual items. These are some functions that we've got into the system. We want to go into the fixings, and we want to basically say, okay, we want to have expensive internal doors or cheap internal doors. Change that specification to low. Change it to high, price goes up. It's all about having access to the back-end database. So it's important for builders who are using this system to know that, hey, let's change the pricing. What you see is not what you get. This is the problem with spreadsheets. This is not the problem here. A very typical example is your second fixings. You can change that to low, but you can have your doors as high. Staircases and balustrades. Balustrades is usually a pretty expensive part of the project. We can also change those specifications. Another feature that we've added into this system is the provisional sums and prime costs. So we can expand out on the tiling, and we can change the header. So whenever we have supply of the items, we can change that to a prime cost. We can actually advise the prime cost budget for the tiles by changing that to a prime cost. And this all expands out as you go into the reporting. We can advise clients pricing room by room in making sure that they know how much money they're spending by changing the overall total to a provisional sum. We can go into the electrical, and we can change the specification of the lighting. I like to change the lighting not just on a supply, but also a labor if I'm going up. If I'm going down in specification, I will tell you what I would do in this situation. So if I'm going to go down and reduce the specification of lighting, I don't want to change the master header level to low, because what that's going to do is going to change my labor rate as well. What I want to do is I want to leave it at high, but I want to go down to the level below, and I want to change the lighting to a low spec. So my labor stays the same at $9,000. If I was to do it on a high level, if I change that to low, my labor will probably go down to $8,000. So it's important to know where you're clicking and you have the right strategy about the prime costs and the labor, and also the supply when you're using the complexity buttons. Carpentry is a very typical situation where we need to be very mindful. One of the most important strategies that I always say to my estimators, if we're doing a lot of work in carpentry, we really, really need to consider additional labor days. So if we populate and we go into our supervision and additional labor, we want to basically go into our additional labor days in our price library and say, where are the complexities of the project? So if we have a lot of risk found in the plumber, we don't want to just add risk to it. We want to basically add labor days as well, because there's going to be items that happen on site that we don't know of. So the plumber's going to get some additional time. The carpenter's going to get some additional time. The plasterer is going to get some additional time because potentially we have curved walls. Structural steel. Now, a very interesting conversation I had the other day is if we've got 90 linear meters of steel. Now, when you work on site, that steel needs to interlock with each other and then gets welded. So what that means is we've got to create a notch. Every time there's a notch, that's not easy to do. You need to make sure your quantities are correct. You need to make sure the cut sizes are correct. It's actually quite complex. So don't be shy in adding steel labor days when you have a lot of steel. And this is a common mistake estimators always make. They just want to punch in the linear meters, enter in a little bit of welding, and off you go. It's actually quite complex. Creating the details to get the notch right. These are things that can happen on site, and these are things that cause delay. As we go out into the BOQ, we'll be able to scroll into carpentry and we'll see those carpentry costings that we've put into the system. So here's our additional labor days. We've just added $20,000 to allow for the risk because potentially we're dealing with curved walls and we're dealing with different situations. If the homeowners want to provide the appliances, we've thought that step forward. So if I go down to my appliances and I press the O button, the 0 button, reset to 0, the pricing actually goes away. But the best part about this feature is that when we go into the electrician, the labor is still there. Important to make sure that we always collect that information. Demolition can be an option change to a provisional sum. We've already spoken about the fixings. We're going to say we have a situation where the builder's got a quote, the concrete. The concrete quote is $300,000. Now, the first step that we need to do is we've got a couple of situations that we need to address because our estimate says we got $250,000. Step number one is I like to have a conversation with the concreter if it's allowed to say, what's your cubic meters for the footings? We have 14 cubic meters. Now, don't tell the concreter you have 14 cubic meters. You want the concreter to say to you, I've got 14 cubic meters. That would be step number one. I wouldn't go through every single element and say, do you have this, 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 and this? I need quantities for this, 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 and this. Just pick out a couple of items and, ask the general question. The other place we can check what happens is if we go into our markup and contingency, you'll notice that we have these levels of buttons. And this is actually a really important part about cross-checking and understanding construction costings. We are saying that the engineering detail is complex, the site is complex, it's not a great job. So we are changing our markup and contingency that we're going to be charged to a level 3. So let's go back to my original conversation. If we have a quote from the concrete at $300,000 and we've already increased our rates and we've already put on additional markup and contingency, why are we getting charged an extra $50,000? Now, if the concreter comes back and confirms that the quantities are correct from your end to his end, that's a step number one, but it is a real test to see, hey, maybe they're taking advantage of the system and putting too much money on the quote. If we have this opportunity, go get a second quote. Now, if we don't have another opportunity to get a second quote or the negotiating part of the quote becomes quite difficult and we have to put in $300,000, reset the whole system to 0 under concreting. I need to delete a manual item I've put in there. Then I can add an item and I say quote. I'll go down to make it an allowance and I will put in $300,000. Then I hit save and we can put $300,000 into the estimate. We have 2 boxes on the left. I am still up in the air about what to actually do with these 2 boxes. I like the idea of using box number 1 to say that I've done my check. And I like the idea of box number 2 to say that I've got a quote. We can also lock the settings. So if I press lock, then that can't be edited. It's almost like a security level to say that, hey, everything's been completed. We are happy with the answer. Let's proceed forward. We can do the same for every other trade that's inside the estimation. But what's important is to firstly, when you go quotation back, ask the quantities question. Second step you might do is review the markup and contingency to basically see, hey, have we put on any extra contingency? And then you need to make a decision what you're going to do inside the estimation. For example, if I went to my windows, I have no markup and no extra contingency. We're basically saying that it's an easy job. When we get the quotation back, it should be close or aligned with our quotation. So we got $95,000 as a provisional sum. Are we within price? Yes. tick 1, tick 2, lock, take it to the next step. We have options once the estimation is completed to export to CSV. We have options to export it to a standard spreadsheet. You can upload into your favorite project management software. We have tried our best to make life a lot easier in exporting. Another feature we've added is the search button at the top. So we can say tiles, and then it will expand out on everything that's inside the system. What I think is really important is to basically have a skill to be able to identify some of the challenges that you're going to face on site. Some of the situations that I like to say to my estimators is make sure you know your surrounding areas. I like to think that, if we're building in a school zone, that's going to be extremely difficult to get out at 3 o'clock. So we potentially might need to change our complexity of our structural element of the build to high or medium. If we're building on a one-way street, that's another trigger for me to say we should be, changing our complexity to high or medium. If we're having 1 meter access from the left to the right, that could be another reason why to change our complexities to high. But having access to the database is what is basically changing this whole system. So we can go from $135,000 earthworks allowance, changing it to high to $185,000. And that's actually a massive change in costings. It's also probably a massive decision because it is going to impact your final construction price. And this is what I believe is the hardest part of an estimator. But the reason why we've built this program is so we can give the builder the responsibility to make the final decision. Previously, with a spreadsheet, you wouldn't be able to click a button and change the pricing from 135 to 185. But that's what this whole system is all about. We want the builder to make those decisions and have the same tools as an estimator. We, as estimators, see complexity different to builders. But ultimately, if you change those complexities or specifications, it will affect your construction price. And I can quite easily change this to $2.7 million based on opinion, or I could drop it down to 2.2 based on opinion. But that's what this whole system is all about. I'm going to wrap it up there. So just some basic overviews of what I'm talking about. We have complexities that we can control. We can change the control of specification. We can hit plus or negative of costings to increase costings. We can use our markup and contingency to change the level of complexity of each trade rather than putting a blanket percentage over the top of the final job. We want to break it down to which ones are the most critical trades. We want to be able to capture that cost because concrete is extremely difficult. Engineer potentially has requested lots of linear meters of steel interlocking with each other. So, we want to increase the structural steel to as high as possible. These are the features we've built. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is our last video of overall. So hopefully it's been useful and we can keep in touch.